Welcome back to The Deep Dive. Today we have, well, a really important and, frankly, a deeply provocative set of sources that challenges just about everything we thought we knew about fighting corruption in Ukraine.
It's a staggering critique, really.
Yeah, it is. This analysis is all centered around the high-profile Midas case, the one involving the state nuclear energy enterprise, Energoatom.
Right.
And the core claim we have to grapple with here is that the entire anti-corruption vertical, that's NABU, SAP, and VAKS, hasn't just failed. The argument is that it has allegedly been hijacked.
It's a huge claim. The author is basically saying that these agencies, which were so highly touted, they're not instruments of reform anymore. They're actually being used as a tool for, organized crime and political warfare.
Which forces us to look beyond just efficiency, doesn't it?
It does. It makes you question the whole constitutional foundation, the very moral purpose of these institutions.
And to help us understand this alleged failure, the author gives us a framework. And I think this is so crucial for you, the listener, to grasp. They talk about two different levels of corruption.
Yes.
Can you maybe walk us through that, the difference between what they call systemic and symptomatic corruption?
Absolutely. This is maybe the key takeaway. The analysis makes it really clear that these anti-corruption bodies allegedly operate with a huge blind spot. And this is where the whole system starts to fail.
Okay.
So on one hand, you have systemic corruption. You could also call it legalized corruption.
Legalized.
Yes.
Oh.
This is the big stuff. The high-level, multi-billion-dollar theft that happens, legally. They pass new laws to privatize strategic assets, like Energoatom.
So it's grain larceny, just dressed up in legislative language.
Exactly. Or they restructure corporate governance with these so-called independent boards.
Right.
Or they get huge international loans under state guarantees that, are easily diverted.
And the claim is that the agencies just let this happen.
The shocking nugget from the source is that they consciously ignore it. They turn a complete blind eye to this legalized plunder.
Okay, so that's the systemic level. What about the other one?
The other one is symptomatic corruption, or, criminal corruption. This is the stuff that generates all the headlines.
Right.
It's the individual bribe, the official who gets caught stealing during a tender, a specific kickback.
Yeah.
The Midas case, on the surface, looks like this. Or, that famous Chernyshov case with the Supreme Court judge.
The things people see and get angry about.
Precisely. And the analysis alleges the Bureau only imitates fighting corruption at this level. By focusing on these small, flashy battles, they actually end up legitimizing the much larger systemic theft.
Which brings us back to the Midas case, because this is where it gets truly, truly disturbing. It moves beyond just, financial graft and to what the source suggests are, humanitarian consequences.
Yeah, it's pretty horrifying.
The sources reveal that during the investigation into this Energoatom scheme, the Bureau was documenting the theft for a year and a half.
A year and a half.
And their tapes recorded conversations where people consciously refused to build protective structures for energy facilities during a war. And the reason? The critique quotes them as saying they felt bad about the money.
That one phrase, felt bad about the money, just says it all, doesn't it? I mean, the depravity there is just...
It's hard to process.
And the analysis argues that the agencies knew. They knew about the lack of these protective structures and the catastrophic risk. Mass casualties from cold and hunger during winter shelling, a potential collapse of the entire energy grid. They knew all of it.
But instead of stepping in immediately, which seems like the obvious thing to do to save lives...
Instead of that, the analysis alleges they chose this tactic of passive observation.
Observation, yes.
Yes. They wanted to cultivate a high-profile case. Why? For a more politically useful outcome. A loud press conference that makes them look good.
So the claim is that they intentionally delayed stopping a national security threat where lives were at risk just to maximize the PR value of the bust. That is staggering.
It is. This is the central ethical crisis, the source documents. Legally, you could call it negligence or maybe aiding diversion. But the social assessment in the source goes much, much further.
How so?
It argues it's a conscious allowance of genocide because the officials allegedly saw the catastrophic consequences coming and they consciously permitted them for their own political aims.
Does the author offer any proof that this delay was a deliberate choice beyond just speculation?
Well, they use counterexamples. They point to other cases like Niaziev and Salnikov, where the Bureau acted almost instantly. There was clear political will, so they moved fast.
Ah, so the speed of their response depends on the target?
That's the interpretation of the source, yes. The delay in the Midas case was a deliberate, selective decision, and it points to a severe moral bankruptcy within the institution.
And the investigation didn't just expose corruption, it supposedly revealed this whole integrated criminal network, what the analysis calls the octopus.
Yes, the octopus.
Yeah.
And the analysis provides a very literal physical link between the crime and the political elite. What do you mean?
The money that was allegedly saved by not building those protective structures, it was apparently channeled directly into building luxury mansions, palaces, the source calls them, for high-ranking officials.
Are you serious?
The analysis alleges the back office of Energoatom was directly financing construction for top government officials.
So, money meant for national security during a war was immediately turned into private real estate for the powerful.
That's the allegation. And it gets worse. The source adds another layer. The so-called Russian trace.
Okay.
The key person running the scheme was apparently a former aide to Andriy Derkach.
The same Derkach who is alleged to be a long-term Russian agent.
The very same. So this crucial link, if true, escalates the whole thing from corruption into the realm of state treason.
Which would explain the political fallout we saw afterward. The source claims the attacks on the Bureau weren't about fighting corruption at all.
Not at all. It was an open struggle of mafia groups, basically clans fighting for control over these huge financial flows and trying to protect their own schemes. So the conclusion is pretty harsh. Instead of being investigators,
They acted like gardeners, cultivating the corrupt elite. The whole system, the source argues, becomes a business model. You open a case against one group, which blocks their rivals, and maybe you get an abonnement fee for your deliberate inaction against the really big players.
which logically brings us to the next part. If this is all happening, how does the system let them get away with it legally? Let's look at the numbers, because they seem to confirm this whole illusion.
Yeah, absolutely do. The 2023 reports are pretty telling. The Bureau investigated around 900 criminal proceedings,
900, okay.
but only sent 133 indictments to court. That is a massive drop-off.
And what about the money they got back? 4.7 billion Ukrainian hryvnia.
The source calls that figure miserable.
Miserable.
Yeah, I mean, you compare it to the established losses. The private bank case alone was estimated at over $5.5 billion. 4.7 billion hryvnia is a rounding error.
So this is where that idea of selectivity comes in. Why go after one case, like the former Naftogaz executive, but let these systemic schemes in a critical wartime enterprise like Energoatom just, ripen for 18 months?
Exactly. The author suggests it's either part of a war of clans or they're just destroying political figures who refuse to, buy their loyalty.
And then there's the legal mechanism that sort of greenlights all of this, the plea bargain. What people in Ukraine call the dohovorniak.
Ah, yes, the legalized indulgence. This is critical. New legislation on plea bargains apparently took away the control of the Prosecutor General's office. A key safeguard was just gone.
And the problem is in the fine print.
It's in the text of the agreement itself. It only requires conditions for partial compensation, not full.
So the law literally allows you to negotiate how much of the stolen money you give back. Crime is guaranteed to pay even if you get caught.
That's the result. And in practice, donating to help for the armed forces becomes the official price list for your freedom. The analysis cites official reports. 2.9 billion UAH was transferred this way over 3 years.
But this is where the source makes what it calls the feudal allegation. This is a huge constitutional point.
It is.
If these agencies are directing huge fines and compensation to private foundations, the source mentions one fund that got 44 million UAH, they're bypassing the state budget entirely.
And that, the author argues, is a profound constitutional violation. By directing state assets where they please, without any legislative control, the NAU and SAP leadership are allegedly acting like feudals, not civil servants. They're above the law.
It's a pay-to-play model, solidified. We even saw it in that Knyazyev bribe case. The intermediary involved allegedly paid $50 million to the military.
And walked away with a 5-year suspended sentence for a case that involved a $2.7 million bribe. The system rewards payment, not justice.
And the latest evidence of this, according to the source, brings us right back to the Midas case. They call it the buyout operation.
Yes. So the Anti-Corruption Court, VAKS, set bail for the arrested Energoatom executives. 126 million and 40 million hryvnia.
Which the source calls intentionally trifling given the scale of the crime and the wartime risk.
Right. And here's the kicker. Investigative journalists found that a shell company paid $37 million in bail for 2 of the defendants.
A shell company.
A shell company. The source says it was created just last spring, has almost zero charter capital, and no real economic activity.
That is the textbook definition of money laundering, using stolen funds to bail out your accomplices.
And the conclusion of the analysis is stark. This isn't justice. It's a mafia operation.
Yeah.
And the biggest failure is that the Bureau and the court are allegedly just letting this happen, this obvious crime, right in front of their faces.
So what does this all mean at the end of the day? The analysis ties all these failures back to the very foundation of the anti-corruption system itself.
It argues the fundamental problem is what it calls the constitutional trap, that NAB, SAP, and VAKS were built outside the constitutional field, violating core principles like popular sovereignty and separation of powers.
Which led to external management.
Exactly. The system created independence from the Ukrainian people, since they're not controlled by the government, but full dependence on external donors and the NGOs who had decisive votes in creating these bodies.
So the system is designed, the author argues, to protect external interests or maybe local elite interests, but not the state itself.
It's a mechanism for controlling local elites, the argument goes, not for actually cleaning up corruption.
But the analysis doesn't just stop at critique. It actually proposes a path forward.
It does. It calls for several concrete actions. First, a constitutional challenge to the entire anti-corruption vertical, filed by the president or the Supreme Court. The structure itself has to be dismantled and rebuilt within the law. An independent national legal audit. And crucially, one that isn't funded by the system's own sponsors. To get an honest accounting of the real failures and the real convictions.
That makes sense.
Third, the immediate creation of a temporary investigative commission in Parliament to probe ABU's inaction in the Midas case, and specifically to go after that shell company that laundered the bail money.
And finally,
they call for this entire analysis to be formally registered as a criminal complaint, listing potential crimes, treason, diversion, abuse of power, and filing it with other state bodies for a real legal assessment of the officials involved.
the deep dive into this Midas case, it paints a truly dark and systemic picture. The anti-corruption structure is alleged to be an incubator for a higher league of thieves who just buy their immunity. The incentive is to steal as much as you can because the price of freedom is negotiable.
And the source's prognosis is bleak. The real organizers won't be prosecuted, the billions won't come back, and maybe a few minor figures will face some consequences.
So what's the final takeaway?
The analysis ends with a really powerful call to action for the citizen. It says if this high-level legal structure is fundamentally flawed, unconstitutional, and externally managed, then the only real path to reform is through the reconstruction of power from the ground up, starting with true, robust local self-governance.
Which leaves us with a pretty heavy final thought.
Does. If the constitutional bodies that are supposed to uphold the law are themselves compromised or even unconstitutional, then where does the source of true sovereign power actually reside? And you have to ask, what is your role in reclaiming it?